My name is Zuri, and at 32 years old, I run my own wealth management firm. When my mother left a voicemail banning me from our family Christmas because my energy ruined my sister's aesthetic, I did not shed a single tear. I opened my laptop and froze every account tied to their name. The mortgage, the electricity, the gas, and the $6,000 catering bill all cut off in an instant. On Christmas Eve, their mansion went dark, their cards declined, and their elite guests walked out. By noon, my phone lit up with panicked calls. Before I share exactly how I dismantled their perfect holiday illusion, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to see how I finally taught my family the true cost of their disrespect. The voicemail echoed through my downtown Atlanta penthouse, filling the quiet space with my mother Valerie's sharp, dismissive tone. Zuri, listen. Preston's parents are flying down from Connecticut tomorrow, and Chantel is stressed trying to make everything flawless. We all had a family meeting and agreed your energy just does not fit the aesthetic this year. You are always so serious and it brings down the mood. You are not welcome at Christmas dinner. Just drop your gifts on the porch by noon. We will send you some leftovers. Love you, bye. The message ended with a cold click. I sat at my glass desk, staring at the dual monitors glowing in front of me. The panoramic view of the city skyline stretched out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but my focus was entirely on the blinking light of my phone. Any other daughter might have broken down crying. Any other daughter might have called back begging for an invitation or demanding an explanation for why she was being excluded from her own family on a holiday. But I was not just any daughter. I was the silent foundation holding up their entire facade. I typed my master password into my wealth management portal. The screen populated with accounts, routing numbers, and blind trusts. I navigated straight to the file labeled Thomas Family Trust. 3 years ago, my father Desmond stood before our mega-church congregation, boasting about how God had blessed him with a miraculous corporate debt relief program that saved their Buckhead mansion from foreclosure. He soaked up the applause and the admiration of the deacon board, acting as if his faith alone had rescued them from ruin. My mother wore a brand new designer suit that Sunday, soaking in the prestige, while my younger sister Chantel bragged to her country club friends about our family's unbreakable wealth. None of them knew the truth. There was no corporate debt relief program. There was only me. I had quietly bought their debt, structured a blind trust through my firm, and paid their mortgage every single month while they treated me like an embarrassing secret. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they could discard me because I chose finance over their superficial social climbing. They idolized Chantel, the golden child, who spent her days curating a perfect lifestyle blog while contributing absolutely nothing of substance to the world. They worshipped her husband Preston, a white man who relied entirely on his family's Connecticut pedigree to intimidate people while secretly bringing zero financial stability to his own marriage. I was the family scapegoat, the one whose career was deemed too intense and whose personality was too demanding. Yet I was the invisible bank rolling their entire existence. I moved my mouse over the master control panel. For 3 years I had swallowed their passive-aggressive comments. I had smiled politely when they praised Preston for buying a leased luxury car with money I practically supplied. I had endured the snide remarks about my hair, my clothes, and my lack of a flashy social media presence. I hovered over the button labeled Suspend. A warning prompt appeared asking to confirm the freeze on all linked accounts. I hit confirm without a second of hesitation. Instantly, the automated payments were halted. The $1,500 monthly mortgage transfer was canceled. The automatic drafts for the gas and electricity were blocked. The line of credit my parents thought was tied to their flawless credit score was frozen completely solid. They were officially cut off. I was about to close the laptop when a pending transaction caught my eye. $6,000 authorized just 2 hours ago to an elite Atlanta catering company. Chantel was clearly pulling out all the stops to impress Preston's parents. She had ordered prime rib stations, a seafood bar, and imported champagne, all funded by the very accounts I controlled. I felt a cold smile form on my lips. I opened the transaction details and clicked Decline Authorization. The screen refreshed, showing the payment as rejected due to insufficient funds. The aesthetic my mother was so desperately trying to protect was about to experience a severe reality check. I closed the laptop, feeling a profound sense of peace. I walked into the kitchen where my partner Tyson was opening a bottle of vintage red wine. Tyson is a corporate attorney who handles hostile takeovers for breakfast, and he had watched my family's toxic dynamics play out for years with growing disdain. He poured me a glass, handed it to me, and kissed my forehead. "Did you do it?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. I took a sip of the wine, letting the rich flavor settle. "Every single dime," I replied. "The bank is officially closed." We moved to the living room, settling onto the velvet sofa. I had barely taken my second sip when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text message from Auntie Denise, the only person in my family who saw through my parents' lies and genuinely loved me. I opened the message and could not help but laugh. "Niece, why is the catering company packing up the shrimp towers and yelling at your daddy in the front yard?" The holiday festivities had officially begun. I picked up my phone to call Auntie Denise back, knowing she would give me the exact play-by-play I needed. She answered on the first ring, her voice hushed but vibrating with amusement. "Zuri, you will not believe the chaos happening right now," she whispered. "Tell me everything," I said, leaning back against Tyson, who was listening intently. "Preston's parents just pulled up in their leased Mercedes," Denise reported, "and they walked right into a shouting match. The head caterer is standing in the foyer, refusing to serve a single appetizer because Valerie's credit card declined twice. Chantel is having a complete meltdown in the dining room, crying about how her table setting is ruined." I could picture the scene perfectly. My father trying to use his booming deacon voice to intimidate the caterers, my mother trying to smooth things over with frantic smiles, and Chantel throwing a tantrum because her perfect holiday content was destroyed. "What is Dad doing?" I asked. "He is trying to pull rank." Denise laughed softly. "He told the caterer, 'Do you know who I am? I am Deacon Thomas.' The caterer told him, 'He does not care if he is the Pope. The shrimp stays in the truck until the bill is paid.'" Preston is standing in the corner looking embarrassed while his parents are whispering to each other in the living room. It is a complete disaster. "Keep me updated, Auntie," I said. "Things are about to get much worse." I ended the call and checked the clock. It was exactly 6:55 in the evening. I knew that the power company's automated shut-off protocol triggered at 7 o'clock sharp for delinquent accounts that had suspensions placed on them. I poured Tyson another glass of wine and waited. 5 minutes later, my phone lit up with another message from Denise. "The lights just went out. The whole house is pitch black and Chantel is screaming." I smiled, taking another sip of wine. The illusion was finally breaking. The people who had called my energy a problem were currently sitting in the freezing dark, realizing that their entire reality was funded by the daughter they had just banned from Christmas. The silence of my penthouse was a stark contrast to the absolute panic I knew was consuming my parents' house. My phone began to vibrate violently on the coffee table. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. This time it was my father. I let that ring too. Tyson chuckled, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. "They are figuring it out," he said. "Not yet," I replied. "Right now they think it is a bank error. They think the system made a mistake. They have no idea that I am the system." A text message popped up on my screen from my mother. "Zuri, please pick up the phone. There is a massive issue with the bank and the power company. We need you to use your financial connections to fix this immediately. Preston's parents are freezing in the living room and Chantel is hyperventilating. Call me back now." I set the phone face down on the table. The audacity to ban me from their home via a voicemail and then demand my expertise hours later when their carefully curated world collapsed was astounding. It was the exact dynamic that had defined my entire life. They wanted the benefits of my success without ever having to respect the woman who achieved it. Suddenly, the intercom system in my penthouse chimed. I pressed the button to connect to the front desk. "Ms. Zuri." The concierge's voice filtered through the speaker, sounding slightly stressed. "Your parents and your sister are down here in the lobby. They are demanding to be let up. They said it is an absolute emergency and that you need to see them right away." I looked at Tyson, who raised an eyebrow. "Send them up," I told the concierge. The time for hiding behind blind trusts and polite silence was over. It was time for a doorstep reckoning. I moved my cursor over the master control dashboard of the Thomas Family Trust. My finger hovered over the trackpad for barely a second before I clicked the primary suspension toggle. A red warning banner flashed across my screen asking if I was certain I wanted to freeze all linked assets. I hit confirm. The visual shift on the monitor was instantaneous and beautifully absolute. Active accounts turned a dead flat gray. Available balances dropped immediately to zero. I started with the monthly auto draft for the mortgage. $1,500 scheduled to leave my holding account in exactly 12 hours was permanently canceled. I watched the status change to void. Next went the utility bundles. The electric bill, the natural gas, the premium water service they used to keep their sprawling suburban lawn perfectly green, even in the dead of December. Blocked. Terminated. Cancelled. Then I navigated to the secondary credit lines. This was the most deeply satisfying part of the process. I pulled up the elite black card I had given my father for what he called pastoral emergencies. The transaction history displayed on my screen was an absolute joke. Last week alone, my mother Valerie had charged $1,200 at a high-end boutique in Lenox Square to buy an outfit for Sunday service. My sister Chantel had put a $400 couples massage on it just 2 days ago so she and her husband Preston could decompress from the stress of holiday shopping. I highlighted the entire account and permanently revoked the authorization. I watched the massive credit limit vanish into nothingness. The financial umbilical cord that had kept their fragile high society image alive for 36 months was officially severed. Just as I reached for the button to log out of the portal, a new notification chimed sharply through my laptop speakers. A pending transaction authorization flashed in the upper right corner of my screen, demanding immediate attention. It was an invoice requiring clearing for exactly $6,000. I opened the merchant details and scoffed. Elite Southern Palate Catering. My eyes scanned the itemized receipt attached to the pending charge. Chantel had truly outdone herself this year. She had ordered a custom prime rib carving station, 2 towering displays of jumbo Gulf, shrimp imported truffle macaroni and cheese, and 3 cases of premium vintage champagne. She was throwing the Christmas Eve party of the decade, designed specifically to impress her white husband Preston and his snooty Connecticut family. And she was doing it entirely on my dime for a holiday dinner. She had explicitly banned me from attending because my energy did not match her curated aesthetic. The sheer unapologetic audacity of it made a genuine laugh bubble up in my throat. I pictured my sister standing in that grand foyer right now, directing the delivery staff, acting like she was the wealthy heiress of Atlanta, while secretly expecting my automated banking system to blindly foot the bill. I moved my cursor to the bottom of the invoice. There were 2 distinct options glowing on the screen: approve or decline. I did not just hit decline. I went directly into the vendor security settings and flagged the merchant, entirely blocking any future attempts to force the charge through under a different code. The system processed my aggressive request, and a bold green checkmark appeared confirming the transaction was dead. The caterer would not receive a single cent from my accounts tonight. I closed the laptop with a definitive snap. The sudden quiet in my penthouse felt completely different than it had 10 minutes ago. The heavy, suffocating weight of being my family's invisible savior evaporated into the cool evening air. I pushed my leather desk chair back and walked barefoot across the dark hardwood floor toward the kitchen. Tyson was leaning against the marble island, loosening his silk tie after a long, brutal day in court. As a senior partner at a top-tier corporate law firm, Tyson knew exactly how to spot a terrible investment. For 3 years, he had watched me quietly fund the very people who treated me like a second-class citizen. He had never demanded I cut them off, but his silent, intense disapproval of my family's relentless entitlement was always present in the background. I knew how hard I worked to build my wealth management firm from the ground up, while my parents praised Chantel simply for marrying into a family that possessed a country club membership. He handed me a large glass of deep red wine, his dark, intelligent eyes studying my face. "You did it," he stated flatly, taking a slow sip from his own glass. "Every single account," I replied, my voice steady and perfectly clear. "The mortgage, the credit cards, the utilities." I even blocked a $6,000 catering charge. Chantel tried to push through for her exclusive holiday party tonight. Tyson let out a low, rich laugh that rumbled in his chest and shook his head. They are going to lose their minds, Zuri. Let them, I said, taking a long sip of the wine. The vintage was bold and expensive, the kind of luxury I actually earned through 80-hour work weeks and brilliant market strategies. I am done being the silent bank for a family that treats me like a burden. I am done paying for Preston to walk around my parents' house acting like he owns the place when he cannot even afford his own car insurance. We walked together into the spacious living room and sat down on the velvet sectional. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the Atlanta skyline glittered brightly against the dark winter sky. Thousands of city lights shone in the distance, completely unaware of the domestic financial warfare I had just initiated. For the first time in my 32 years of life, I was not rushing to fix my parents' self-inflicted mistakes. I was not scrambling to make sure my mother had enough money to maintain her flawless status at the megachurch. I was just sitting in my own home, protected by my own boundaries, enjoying my own peace. 10 minutes passed in highly comfortable silence. The wine warmed my blood, and the tension I usually carried in my shoulders began to melt away. Then my phone, resting on the glass coffee table, vibrated violently. The screen illuminated the dark room with a bright flash. I expected it to be a frantic, aggressive text from my mother, or a demanding, authoritative call from my father. But the name that flashed across the screen was Auntie Denise. She was my father's older sister, and the only person in that entire bloodline who absolutely refused to play along with their fake high society games. She knew exactly who paid the bills behind closed doors, and she had always warned me that my continuous generosity would only breed their contempt. She was invited to the party tonight strictly out of family obligation, and I knew she was currently sitting in their living room watching the disaster unfold in real time. I picked up the phone and opened her message. I read the words twice, a slow, highly satisfied smile spreading across my face. Tyson leaned over my shoulder to read the bright screen, holding his wine glass loosely in his hand. The text was simple, but it painted an absolute masterpiece of a scene. Niece, why is the catering company packing up the shrimp towers and yelling at your daddy? I tapped the video call icon on Auntie Denise's contact profile. She answered immediately. Her face filled the screen, but she was angled perfectly so I could see the grand foyer of my parents' mansion over her shoulder. She had hidden herself in the alcove near the coat closet, clutching a thermos of spiked sweet tea. Zuri, you will not believe the foolishness happening right now, Denise whispered, her voice shaking with suppressed laughter. I wish you were here, baby. This is better than reality television. Tyson leaned in close to the screen, his chin resting on my shoulder. We watched as the camera panned to the heavy mahogany front doors. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see headlights sweeping up the circular driveway. That is Preston's parents, Denise narrated. They just pulled up in that silver Mercedes they always brag about leasing. And right on time because the catering manager is currently standing in the center of Valerie's custom-imported Persian rug, refusing to move until he gets paid. I watched the screen intently. The catering manager, a tall man wearing a crisp black uniform, was aggressively pointing at a handheld payment terminal. My mother Valerie was pacing back and forth, waving her hands in a frantic rhythm. Her perfectly sprayed hair was already beginning to lose its volume. She was wearing a velvet emerald gown meant to intimidate, but right now she just looked desperate. Run the card one more time, my mother hissed, her voice carrying clearly through the phone audio. The bank software is just experiencing a holiday glitch. I am Valerie Thomas. Do you honestly think I cannot afford some roasted meat and seafood? Ma'am, I have run your card 4 times, the caterer replied loudly. I ran the platinum card. I ran the gold card. I even ran the department store card you handed me in a panic. Every single one says declined. My crew is packing up the chafing dishes right now. Denise shifted her phone, giving us a clear view of the formal dining room. 2 workers in black aprons were literally lifting the massive tiered seafood tower off the dining table. The ice sculptures Chantel had bragged about on social media for 3 weeks were being dismantled. Trays of expensive cuts of meat were being wheeled straight out the back door toward the catering van. Just as a worker carried a large platter of bacon-wrapped scallops past the front entryway, The heavy oak doors swung open. Preston and his parents stepped inside. His mother wore an oversized fur coat and an expression that suggested she smelled something rotting. His father stood tall, gripping a bottle of wine that probably cost less than $20, but had a fancy label designed to fool people. "Happy holidays to the Thomas family," Preston's mother announced, her crisp New England accent echoing in the foyer. Her smile vanished instantly as she took in the chaotic scene. She sidestepped a catering worker who was hauling away a crate of imported cheeses. "Oh my. Are we interrupting a renovation?" Chantel ran into the frame. She was wearing a sparkling silver gown that she had undoubtedly charged to my now frozen credit line. She was literally holding a portable ring light in one hand. Her face was contorted in sheer panic. She grabbed Preston's arm, pulling him forward. "Preston, tell them to stop!" Chantel shrieked, pointing at the caterers. "They are ruining my winter wonderland aesthetic." I promised my followers a live stream of the carving station at 6:30. Preston, do something. Preston cleared his throat, puffing out his chest. He took a step toward the catering manager. "Listen here, pal. I do not know what kind of amateur operation you are running, but my wife expects absolute perfection. Put the food back on the table before I call my attorneys." The catering manager let out a harsh laugh. "Call whoever you want, buddy. But unless your attorney is bringing $6,000 in cash right now, the food goes back in the truck. You people are broke." Preston's face turned a violent shade of red. He glanced back at his parents, who were now whispering to each other with wide eyes. His father protectively clutched their cheap bottle of wine, stepping back toward the door. That was when my father, Desmond, decided to make his grand entrance. He marched down the grand staircase, adjusting his custom-tailored suit jacket. He had always used his deep, booming voice to intimidate his congregation, and he clearly thought the same tactic would work on a working-class vendor. "What is the meaning of this disrespect?" Desmond thundered, stepping directly into the caterer's personal space. "I am Deacon Thomas. I sit on the executive board of the largest church in Atlanta. I demand you cease this foolishness and serve our guests immediately. I will have my assistant call your corporate office on Monday and handle this minor billing error." Deacon Thomas, the manager, shot back, his tone laced with absolute zero respect. "I do not care if you sit on the executive board of heaven itself. Your accounts are dead. Your wife's cards are dead. And I am not running a charity kitchen for people who live in mansions they clearly cannot afford." I let out a loud laugh that echoed in my quiet penthouse. Tyson shook his head, a grin spreading across his face. He just gave Deacon Thomas the gospel truth. Auntie Denise whispered into the phone, taking another long sip from her thermos. My father looked as if he had been slapped across the face. For his entire life, Desmond had hidden behind his religious titles and his perfectly pressed suits, relying on intimidation to cover up his financial incompetence. I remembered when I was in college working double shifts to pay for my own textbooks, because he claimed the church demanded a massive tithe that year. Later I found out he had used my tuition money to buy a luxury boat to impress the other deacons. He had always sacrificed his children for his pride, but pride could not pay a $6,000 catering invoice. Valerie rushed forward, physically pushing my father aside before he could escalate the situation further. She plastered on a terrifyingly fake smile and turned toward Preston's parents, who were still hovering by the coat rack, looking horrified. "Martha, Richard, please come into the living room," my mother sang out, her voice unnaturally high. "There has just been a ridiculous mix-up with our primary wealth management firm. You know how these massive banking institutions can be during the holidays. They put a security freeze on our accounts due to suspicious out-of-state activity. It is completely my fault for shopping so much in Paris last month." It was a masterful lie. A brilliant rapid-fire fabrication designed to make her look like a victim of extreme wealth rather than a casualty of financial suspension. I rolled my eyes. She had not been to Paris in a decade. "Please sit by the fireplace," Valerie continued, ushering the stiff older couple into the living room. "Chantel, darling, why do not you go to the cellar and grab those bottles of wine we were saving? The rustic ones. We can have a lovely intimate evening with just drinks while Desmond sorts out the banking executives." But my aesthetic, Chantel sobbed, stomping her foot on the hardwood floor like a petulant toddler. "My followers are waiting for the prime rib reveal. I cannot just serve wine." "Forget the prime rib," Chantel, Preston hissed, grabbing her arm tightly. My parents are starving and your family is humiliating me. Go get the wine. Chantel ran off toward the kitchen, crying loudly, dropping her ring light on the floor. The caterers slammed the front door shut behind them, leaving a devastating silence in the grand foyer. My father stood there rubbing his temples while my mother hovered over the wealthy in-laws, offering them dry crackers from a pantry box she had managed to scrounge up. "This is pure gold, Zuri," Denise whispered into the camera, turning the lens so I could see Preston's mother inspecting a stale water cracker with absolute disgust. "Valerie is out here serving saltines to people who came expecting lobster. The tension in this room is thick enough to cut with a knife." I checked the digital clock on my laptop screen. It read 6:58. The timing was aligning perfectly. "Tell me what Valerie is doing right now," I said, leaning closer to the phone screen. "She is telling Preston's mother about how we are going to pivot to a cozy candlelit evening," Denise replied. "She keeps saying that sometimes stripped-down simplicity is the truest form of elegance." "That is highly convenient," I said, checking the clock again. It ticked to 6:59. "Why do you say that?" Denise asked, adjusting her grip on the phone. "Because she is going to need a lot of those candles very soon," I said. The digital numbers on my screen flipped. The clock struck 7 o'clock exact. The digital numbers on my screen flipped to 7 o'clock. Through the FaceTime connection on my phone, I watched the exact moment reality crashed down on my family. The massive crystal chandelier in the grand foyer, the recessed lighting illuminating the sweeping staircase, the landscape spotlights shining through the front windows, every single light source died in a fraction of a second. The sprawling suburban mansion plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. The sudden quiet of the heating and cooling system powering down was immediately replaced by a chorus of panicked shrieks. Auntie Denise let out a sharp cackle in the dark before fumbling to turn on her phone flashlight. The harsh white beam swept across the foyer, capturing a scene of total devastation. My mother Valerie was frozen in place, her mouth wide open, holding a tray of dry crackers in the dark. Preston's wealthy Connecticut parents were huddled together near the doorway, looking around as if they had just been dropped into a war zone. Then came the scream. It was high-pitched, completely unhinged, and echoing from the dining room. Chantel came stomping into the flashlight beam, waving her phone in the air. "This cannot be happening!" Chantel shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "The caterers stole our food, and now the power grid is failing. Preston, do something. Your parents are going to think we are poor. They are going to think we are poor like Zuri." Sitting in my climate-controlled penthouse, overlooking the glowing Atlanta skyline, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my vintage red wine. I turned to Tyson, who was watching the screen with a mixture of amusement and utter disbelief. "Poor like Zuri," I murmured, my voice low and smooth. "Poor like Zuri, who paid for that $80,000 custom Italian chandelier she is currently crying under, because our father bounced a check to the importer 2 years ago and begged me to save him from international embarrassment." Tyson shook his head, a cynical smile touching his lips. "It is truly fascinating how quickly their high society illusion shatters without your money propping it up," he said. "They are standing in a dark, freezing house calling you poor while you hold the deed to the property." On the screen, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. The December chill was already seeping through the massive, uninsulated decorative windows of the McMansion. Preston's mother wrapped her oversized fur coat tighter around her shoulders, shivering dramatically. "Preston, this is entirely unacceptable," his mother announced, her crisp New England accent dripping with judgment. "First, we are subjected to a humiliating dispute with the help, and now we are standing in a freezing dark hallway. I told your father we should have stayed at the Four Seasons. Get our driver on the phone immediately. We are leaving." Valerie dropped her tray of crackers, the sound clattering loudly in the dark. "Martha, please wait," my mother begged, her voice thick with desperation, as she scrambled toward the older woman. "It is just a blown fuse. The neighborhood grid must be overwhelmed by all the holiday lights. Desmond is going to check the breaker box right now." Desmond, my proud, hypocritical father, was nowhere near the breaker box. Auntie Denise panned the camera slightly, catching him staring blankly at his useless platinum credit card in the faint moonlight filtering through the windows. He knew a blown fuse did not cause his cards to decline. He knew exactly what a total financial blackout looked like. "I cannot stay here in the dark. Preston complained, rubbing his arms. Chantel, this is ridiculous. My parents flew all the way from the East Coast for a luxury Southern Christmas, and you have them standing in a freezing house with no food and no power. Call someone to fix this. My phone began to vibrate violently on the glass coffee table, rattling against the surface. The FaceTime call with Auntie Denise minimized into a small corner window as a barrage of text messages flooded my screen. They were all from Valerie. I picked up the device and read the frantic words aloud to Tyson. Zuri, call your people at the bank immediately. The text read, there is a massive glitch in the system. The power company made an error and shut off our grid. Use your financial connections to get a representative on the phone right now. Preston's family is freezing in our living room and Chantel is having a panic attack. Fix this bank error. I stared at the glowing words. The absolute entitlement radiated through the screen. Just an hour ago, she had left a voicemail telling me my energy did not fit their aesthetic. She had banned me from the very house I was secretly paying for. Yet the moment her carefully curated fake reality crumbled, her first instinct was to demand my labor, my expertise, and my resources to rebuild it. She did not ask how I was doing on Christmas Eve. She did not apologize for discarding me. She simply expected me to serve her. Tyson read the messages over my shoulder and let out a harsh scoff. She is commanding you to fix a problem she believes is a clerical error while actively treating you like the help, he said, adjusting his posture on the velvet sofa. She has no idea she is demanding the executioner to call off the execution. I did not type a single letter in response. I simply left the messages on read, knowing the little notification at the bottom of her screen would confirm I saw her demands and chose to ignore them. I wanted her to feel the heavy, suffocating panic of being ignored. I wanted her to experience the exact same dismissal she had subjected me to for 32 years. Auntie Denise brought her face close to her phone camera, her features illuminated by the harsh flashlight. Well, baby girl, she whispered, a wide grin on her face. The Connecticut Royals just walked out the front door. Preston is chasing their car down the driveway, begging them to stay, and Chantel is hyperventilating on the stairs. I am going to slip out the side door and head back to my warm apartment. You enjoy your Christmas Eve, Zuri. You earned it. The video call disconnected, leaving my phone screen dark for a moment before another wave of text messages from my mother poured in. Zuri, answer me. They left. Preston's parents left and took him with them to a hotel. Chantel is inconsolable. You work in wealth management. Wake up your managing director. Do your job and fix this house. I set the phone face down on the table. I leaned back into the plush cushions, pulling my cashmere throw blanket over my legs. The contrast between my reality and theirs was staggering. My penthouse was bathed in warm golden light from the custom fixtures. The scent of an expensive cedar wood candle filled the air. Soft jazz played quietly from the surround sound speakers. I was safe, warm, and completely at peace. Miles away in the suburbs, my family was shivering in the dark, surrounded by the ruins of their fake wealth, finally facing the consequences of their relentless arrogance. They are going to need a scapegoat, Tyson said softly, swirling the last of his wine. Your mother cannot blame her own financial incompetence, and Desmond will never admit he is broke. They are going to blame you for not answering the phone. They are going to convince themselves that their ruined Christmas is entirely your fault for not using your corporate connections to save them. Let them try, I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. They can blame me all they want from the comfort of a freezing living room. Tomorrow is Christmas Day, and they have no food, no power, and no money to buy a single cup of coffee. The reality of their situation will set in by sunrise. We sat in the quiet luxury of the penthouse, letting the gravity of the evening settle around us. For years, I had played the good daughter. I had absorbed their insults, swallowed my pride, and quietly transferred thousands of dollars to keep a roof over their heads, because I believed that is what family did. I had convinced myself that my financial support would eventually earn their respect. But respect cannot be bought from people who are fundamentally committed to misunderstanding your worth. They did not want a daughter. They wanted a silent, unlimited ATM. The silence of my apartment was suddenly pierced by a sharp electronic chime. It was not my cell phone this time. It was the secure intercom system mounted on the wall near the entryway. Tyson and I exchanged a quick look. No one was scheduled to visit us tonight. Our building required keycard access for the elevators, and the front desk concierge screened every single guest. I stood up from the sofa and walked over to the panel, pressing the receiver button. Yes, I answered, my voice echoing slightly in the hallway. Ms. Zuri, the concierge spoke, his tone tight with professional stress. I am so sorry to disturb you on a holiday evening. However, your parents and your sister are down here in the main lobby. They are highly agitated and demanding to be led up to your residence. They are stating that it is an absolute emergency and that you need to come down to face them right now. The polished steel doors of my private elevator slid open to reveal the sprawling marble lobby of my building. Tyson stepped out beside me, his presence a quiet but immovable force. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my cashmere wrap draped elegantly over my shoulders. The lobby was usually a sanctuary of quiet luxury filled with soft instrumental music and the faint scent of orchids. Tonight it was a chaotic mess of my family's making. They were pacing in front of the concierge desk, looking completely unhinged. My mother, Valerie, was clutching her emerald velvet gown like it was a shield, her perfectly set hair now frizzy from the winter humidity. My father, Desmond, was sweating through his custom suit, his deacon persona crumbling into raw panic. And Chantel, my golden child sister, was literally shivering in her silver sequin dress, mascara running down her cheeks from crying over her ruined social media aesthetic. The moment my mother spotted me, her frantic pacing stopped. She did not say hello. She did not wish me a Merry Christmas. She did not even acknowledge Tyson standing right next to me. She marched across the marble floor, her heels clicking aggressively. Zuri, I took you long enough, she snapped, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my face. Get your phone out right now. The power company hung up on your father, and the bank hotline is giving us an automated holiday recording. You need to call your managing director, or whoever runs the corporate debt relief program, and tell them to turn our grid back on. I crossed my arms, keeping my voice completely level. I am not calling anyone, Valerie. And I am certainly not waking up a bank executive on Christmas Eve because you forgot to pay your bills. My father stepped forward, his chest puffed out in that familiar, intimidating stance he used to bully the church staff. Do not take that tone with your mother, Zuri, he barked. You work in finance. You know exactly how to bypass these automated systems. Call the debt program right now. Preston's parents are sitting in a freezing dark house down the street, and my reputation is on the line. I am a deacon in this community. I will not be made a fool of because of some clerical error. Chantel shoved her way past our parents, her face blotchy and red. Her voice was shrill, echoing off the high ceiling of the lobby, causing the night security guard to shift uncomfortably at his post. You are doing this on purpose, Chantel screamed, stamping her foot. You are just jealous because Preston's family comes from Connecticut money, and you are bitter that you are not married yet. You probably hacked the account just to ruin my perfect winter wonderland dinner. Fix it, Zuri. Tell them to turn the lights back on. Preston is furious with me. I looked at my younger sister, taking in her ruined makeup and her absolute delusion. For my entire life, she had been handed everything on a silver platter, paid for by my hard work, while she claimed all the glory. She honestly believed the universe revolved around her Instagram feed. No one hacked anything. Chantel, I replied, my tone dangerously calm. The power company cuts off service when an account goes into default, and a block is placed on the credit profile. That is not a glitch. That is a consequence. My mother let out a loud, exasperated gasp, throwing her hands in the air. This is exactly why we did not want you at the house tonight, Zuri. You are entirely useless when we actually need you. You sit up here in your fancy penthouse acting like you are better than us. But the second your family faces a crisis, you refuse to lift a single finger to help. Your sisters-in-laws are laughing at us right now. They think we are frauds. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between my mother and me. I looked directly into her panicked eyes, stripping away decades of her gaslighting and manipulation in a single breath. They are not laughing at a bank error, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. They are laughing at you. Valerie physically recoiled as if I had struck her across the face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Desmond immediately stepped in between us, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. How dare you speak to your mother that way? He thundered, his voice booming through the lobby. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. We gave you everything, and you stand there in your designer clothes looking down your nose at us. You are going to pick up your phone, you are going to call the debt relief program that sponsored our mortgage, and you are going to demand they restore our services. You owe us that much respect. Tyson shifted his weight slightly, preparing to intervene, but I held up a hand to stop him. I did not need my partner to fight this battle. I had been preparing for this exact moment for 3 long years. I had swallowed their insults. I had endured their public humiliation. I had listened to them brag to the entire congregation about a miraculous corporate grant that saved their mansion from foreclosure, all while they treated me like the family embarrassment. I owe you absolutely nothing. Desmond, I stated, using his first name to shatter the last illusion of his parental authority. You stood in front of 2,000 people at Sunday service and testified that God sent a corporate sponsor to pay off your second mortgage when you gambled away your savings on terrible stock investments. You let Chantel tell her wealthy in-laws that this family is built on generational wealth. You both demanded perfection while living entirely on a mountain of secrets. Chantel crossed her arms, shivering in her thin dress. You are just crazy, she muttered, trying to sound superior despite her chattering teeth. You are making up lies because you hate that I have a husband who comes from a good family. Just call the bank, Zuri. Stop being so incredibly selfish. Preston's parents are staying at the Ritz right now because our house is freezing. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is? It should be embarrassing, I agreed smoothly. It should be deeply, profoundly embarrassing to realize you have spent your entire adult life pretending to be royalty on someone else's dime. My mother narrowed her eyes, stepping forward again. What are you talking about, Zuri? Stop talking in riddles and do your job. We are not leaving this lobby until you get that corporate program on the phone and restore our credit lines. I have a holiday brunch to host tomorrow morning and I refuse to cancel it. I stared at the three of them. They were so thoroughly convinced of their own lies that they could not even comprehend the reality standing right in front of them. They genuinely believed a faceless banking institution had swooped in to save them out of the goodness of its corporate heart. They honestly thought their high society status was secure. They had pushed me aside, banned me from their table, and discarded me because they thought they no longer needed my quiet financial advice. They thought the well would never run dry. I reached into my structured leather designer bag hanging from my shoulder. The crisp sound of the metal clasp snapping open echoed sharply in the tense quiet of the lobby. My mother watched my hands expectantly, clearly assuming I was finally pulling out my cell phone to make the call she demanded. Chantel let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, wiping the smeared mascara from under her eyes. My father crossed his arms, looking smug and victorious, believing his intimidation tactics had worked once again. But I did not pull out a phone. I reached deep into the bag and pulled out a thick, heavy leather-bound financial ledger. The gold-embossed letters on the front cover caught the ambient light of the lobby chandelier. I held the heavy book in my hands, feeling the weight of 3 years of canceled checks, wire transfers, and property deeds. The weapon I had kept hidden in the shadows was finally coming into the light. The heavy leather-bound ledger felt solid and commanding in my hands. The gold-embossed letters on the cover caught the ambient light of the lobby chandelier. I opened the book deliberately, letting the thick parchment pages flip until I reached the exact center. I pulled out a stack of notarized documents complete with the official blue ink signatures and the raised foil seal of the state of Georgia. I did not shove the papers in my mother's face. I did not raise my voice to match my sister's frantic, high-pitched whining. I simply extended my arm and held the documents perfectly still so my father could see the bold print at the very top of the page. Read it, Desmond. I commanded, my voice dropping to a glacial chill that left absolutely no room for negotiation. Read the name of the primary benefactor on the trust agreement. Read the name of the entity that swooped in to save you when you gambled your retirement savings on terrible stock tips and defaulted on your second mortgage. My father puffed out his chest, preparing to deliver another booming lecture about disrespect, but his eyes involuntarily darted down to the paper. The bluster instantly drained from his body. I watched the color wash out of his face, leaving his skin looking ashen and gray under the lobby lights. His mouth opened slightly, but the authoritative deacon voice he relied on for decades completely failed him. He stared at the signature line, then looked up at me, his eyes wide with a sudden terrifying comprehension. "What does it say?" Desmond, my mother demanded, snatching the paper from his trembling hands. She squinted at the legal jargon, her emerald velvet gown rustling as she shifted her weight. She scanned the document, and I watched her perfectly manicured nails dig into the crisp edges of the paper. "This is a trick," she gasped, her voice shaking. "This is a forgery. You printed this off the internet to humiliate us." "There is no miraculous corporate grant," I stated, slicing through her denial with absolute precision. "There never was." When the bank was 72 hours away from putting a foreclosure notice on the front door of that Buckhead mansion 3 years ago, no magical financial institution stepped in to save your social standing. I am the one who stepped in. I structured the blind trust. I bought your bad debt. I am the bank. The silence that followed my words was deafening. The only sound in the grand lobby was the faint hum of the elevators, and the ragged, panicked breathing of my mother. "I own the mortgage." I continued, stepping closer so she could hear every single syllable clearly. "I pay the electric bill that keeps your custom Italian chandeliers shining. I pay the gas bill that heats your formal dining room. I pay the property taxes that allow you to host your exclusive sorority meetings without fear of an audit. I even paid for the prime rib and the imported shrimp you tried to serve tonight. And since you called a family meeting and explicitly decided that my presence does not fit your flawless holiday aesthetic, I decided that my money no longer fits your aesthetic either." Chantel let out a piercing, completely unhinged shriek. She lunged forward, her silver sequined dress flashing as she aggressively slapped the leather ledger right out of my hands. The heavy book hit the marble floor with a loud, echoing smack, but I did not even flinch. Tyson instantly shifted his weight, stepping smoothly to my side, his dark eyes locked on Chantel with a silent, lethal warning that made her freeze in her tracks. "You are a liar!" Chantel screamed, her face contorted with rage and ruined makeup. "You are making this all up because you are incredibly jealous of me. You have always been jealous. You are just bitter because Mom and Dad love me more. You are furious because I married a successful man from a wealthy family, and you are still just an angry, isolated workaholic. You hacked into our accounts to ruin my perfect winter wonderland dinner because you cannot stand seeing me happy." I looked at my younger sister, feeling absolutely nothing but pity. She was 30 years old and still throwing temper tantrums in public lobbies when reality refused to bend to her delusions. "I do not need to hack anything." "Chantel," I replied smoothly, picking up the ledger from the floor and dusting it off. "I am the primary account holder. I can show you the routing numbers, the wire transfers, and the exact dates I paid off the massive credit card debt you racked up buying designer bags you claimed your husband bought for you. You have spent your entire adult life pretending to be a wealthy socialite while treating me like the family burden. You wanted a picture-perfect Christmas without my negative energy. Now you have it. Go enjoy your holiday in the dark." My mother grabbed my arm, her perfectly polished facade finally cracking into pure, unadulterated desperation. "Zuri, please," she begged, her voice dropping its haughty tone. "You cannot do this to us. Not tonight. We have guests. Preston's family is expecting a certain level of hospitality. We told them we own the house outright. If they find out the power was shut off because of unpaid bills, they will ruin our reputation. They will tell everyone at the country club. You are going to destroy your father's standing at the church. Turn the accounts back on right now, and we can discuss this like civilized adults tomorrow morning." I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. "You lost the right to negotiate with me when you left that voicemail, Valerie," I said. "You banned me from the table I bought. You told me to drop my gifts on the porch like a delivery driver. You thought you could continue to drain my resources while simultaneously treating me like trash. The bank is officially closed. You have exactly 30 days to figure out how to pay your own mortgage." My father finally found his voice, though it sounded weak and defeated. "Zuri, we are your parents," he pleaded, his broad shoulders slumping in his tailored suit. "The Bible says, 'Honor thy father and mother.' You cannot leave us out in the cold. It is an abomination." I stared at the man who had spent my entire life prioritizing his church status over his own daughter. "Do not quote scripture to me, Desmond, while you are wearing a $3,000 suit paid for by my labor. You honored your pride. You honored your public image. You never honored me." Before my father could formulate another manipulative religious guilt trip, the heavy glass doors of the lobby slid open with a violent rush of cold winter air. Heavy footsteps marched aggressively across the marble floor. I turned to see Preston storming toward us. Chantel's white husband looked absolutely furious. His usually perfectly combed blonde hair was windblown, and his face was flushed a deep, angry red. He had clearly just finished dropping his wealthy Connecticut parents off at a luxury hotel and had returned to play the role of the protective alpha male. He shoved his hands into the pockets of his expensive wool coat, a coat I knew for a fact was purchased using the secondary credit card I had just frozen. He pushed past my father and stepped directly into my personal space, trying to use his height and his country club arrogance to intimidate me. "Listen here," Preston snarled, pointing a rigid finger directly at my face. "I do not know what kind of ghetto scam you are pulling on my wife's family, but you need to fix it right now. You are not going to disrespect us and ruin our holiday. Turn the power back on or my lawyers will bury you." Preston stood inches from my face, his breath coming in sharp, angry bursts. He was easily 6 feet 2 inches tall, and he used every bit of that height to try and cast a shadow over me. He had spent the last 3 years parading around my parents' house, treating it like his personal country club kingdom, acting as if marrying into our family was some sort of charitable act on his part. My parents had practically rolled out the red carpet for him, worshipping his blonde hair, his Connecticut pedigree, and his last name, because they thought it elevated their own social standing. "You think you can just flip a switch and terrorize my family?" Preston growled, pointing a finger so close to my face I could feel the air move. "You think because you run some little boutique accounting firm, you can play God with people's lives? My father plays golf with the managing partners of the biggest banks on the East Coast. I will have my family's legal team file a massive lawsuit against you for financial manipulation and emotional distress before the sun comes up tomorrow. You are going to end up in federal prison for this ghetto scam." I did not blink. I did not take a single step backward. I just looked at the expensive tailored wool coat he was wearing, remembering the exact date my secondary credit line was charged $2,000 at a luxury menswear boutique. Before I could even open my mouth to respond, Tyson moved. My partner did not shout. He did not puff out his chest or throw his hands around like my father and Preston always did. Tyson simply stepped smoothly between Preston and me, sliding into the space with the lethal quiet grace of a predator who had just spotted his next meal. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Preston, smoothing the lapels of his custom dark suit, his expression radiating absolute corporate violence. "You must be the illustrious Preston Tyson," said his voice a low, rich baritone that commanded instant respect. "Zuri has told me absolutely nothing about you, which honestly speaks volumes. But since you are throwing around threats of litigation, I think we should be properly introduced. I am Tyson. I am a senior partner at one of the top corporate litigation firms in the Southeast. And the fact that you just used the phrase ghetto scam to describe a lawful suspension of assets tells me everything I need to know about your absolute lack of legal comprehension." Preston's jaw clenched. He tried to maintain his aggressive stance, but I could see the immediate flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He was used to intimidating my mother and father, who bowed down to his perceived white wealth. He was not used to facing a highly successful black man who could destroy him in a courtroom before his morning coffee. "I do not care who you are," Preston sneered, though his voice had lost a fraction of its booming confidence. "She illegally shut off the power to a house she does not live in. That is a crime. It is only a crime if you shut off the power to a house you do not own," Tyson corrected smoothly, his tone almost conversational. "As the sole owner of the blind trust that holds the deed to that property, Zuri can turn the property into a parking lot if she so desires. If you would like to call the police to report a property owner managing her own utilities, I encourage you to dial 911 right now. I would love to hear you explain the situation to the dispatcher." Preston swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward my parents, who were standing frozen near the concierge desk. Valerie and Desmond offered absolutely no help. Their own illusions had been shattered and they were currently suffocating in their own panic. When Preston did not reach for his phone, Tyson offered a cold, completely devoid smile. "That is what I thought," Tyson said. He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a crisp white sealed envelope. He held it out, resting it lightly against Preston's chest. Consider this a holiday gift from Zuri and myself. A little light reading for your freezing hotel room tonight. Preston stared at the envelope as if it were a loaded weapon. He did not take it. Chantel rushed forward, grabbing the envelope from Tyson's hand with trembling fingers. "What is this?" Chantel demanded, her voice shrill and defensive. "What fake documents did you print out now, Zuri?" "There is nothing fake about it," I said, stepping out from behind Tyson to look directly at my sister and her arrogant husband. "Let us talk about scams, Preston. Let us talk about the absolute fraud you have been running on this family while looking down your nose at me." My mother Valerie finally found her voice, stepping forward with her hands raised in a placating gesture. "Zuri, please do not do this. Preston is a visionary. He is building a groundbreaking technology application. He just hit a rough patch with the startup costs." "A rough patch," I repeated, laughing, a sharp, humorless sound that echoed off the marble walls of the lobby. "Mom, you and Dad came to my office last spring, begging for a $40,000 emergency liquidity loan. You sat in my guest chairs crying about how the mansion needed a new roof, and the church required a massive mandatory donation for the new fellowship hall. I gave you the money because despite how you treat me, I never wanted to see you publicly humiliated." Desmond looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. His silence was the loudest confession in the room. "But I track every single cent that leaves my firm." I continued, my voice rising slightly, demanding that every person in the lobby hear the absolute truth. "I watched that $40,000 hit your checking account, and I watched it bounce exactly 24 hours later into a limited liability company registered to Preston." Chantel grabbed Preston's arm, her eyes wide with frantic denial. "He needed seed money for the app development, Zuri. Mom and Dad believed in his vision. You would not understand, because you have zero faith in family. Preston is going to be a millionaire when the app launches." "Your husband is not building an app, Chantel," I stated coldly. "He is building a massive wall of debt. I ran a full forensic audit on his limited liability company. That $40,000 did not go to software developers. It did not go to marketing. $25,000 went straight to the Internal Revenue Service to pay off severe back taxes, because Preston has not filed a legitimate return in 4 years. The remaining $15,000 went to a highly questionable offshore exchange to cover catastrophic losses in cryptocurrency." Preston's face drained of all color. He looked exactly like a ghost standing under the bright lobby chandelier. He opened his mouth to speak, but he was completely paralyzed. "That is a lie!" Chantel screamed, ripping the sealed envelope open. Her manicured nails tore the paper viciously. She pulled out a thick stack of printed bank statements and tax liens. She stared at the highlighted lines of text, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to comprehend the numbers. "Preston's family is rich. His father is an investment banker. Why would he need Mom and Dad's money to pay taxes? Because his family cut him off 2 years ago." I revealed, delivering the final crushing blow to his carefully crafted image. "His parents are not staying at a hotel right now because my house is freezing. They checked into a hotel because they refused to be in the same room as their grifter son for more than 3 hours. Preston has been using my parents' desperate need for proximity to whiteness and perceived high society status to fund his absolute failure of a life. And my parents have been using my hard-earned wealth to pay for it all." "You are making this up!" Valerie protested weakly, stepping toward Chantel to look at the papers. She squinted at the documents, trying desperately to find a flaw in the paperwork. "Preston is a good man. He just needs a little more time to get his business off the ground." "He does not have a business, Mom," I said flatly. "He is an unemployed fraud who married a woman obsessed with aesthetics, so he could live in a mansion he assumed was paid for. You essentially bought a white son-in-law with my money, so you could brag to the church deacons about your diverse elite family." Preston lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers out of Chantel's hands. "Give me those," he demanded, his voice cracking with desperation. "They are forged. She forged federal tax documents to ruin our marriage, Chantel. You cannot believe her." Chantel ripped her arms away from him, clutching the papers to her chest. Her eyes darted wildly between Preston's panicked face and the undeniable evidence in her hands. The golden child was finally realizing her entire fairy tale existence was nothing but a cheap set piece built on a foundation of lies. I reached into my structured leather bag one more time, pulling out a second folder. "If you think those documents are forged, Preston," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, unyielding pitch. "Let me read the direct wire transfer statements aloud right here in the lobby. Let me read the exact dates and times you funneled money to your offshore gambling accounts while you were supposedly sitting in my parents' dining room working on your visionary technology." Preston took a rapid step backward, his face going completely pale as I placed my hand on the cover of the folder, preparing to read the bank statements aloud. I opened the folder. The sharp sound of the heavy paper turning echoed in the dead silence of the lobby. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the clinical detachment of a corporate auditor delivering a financial death sentence. On October 12th, a wire transfer of exactly $25,000 was initiated from your supposed business account directly to the Internal Revenue Service, I read, keeping my eyes locked on Preston. The reference code attached to the wire matches a federal tax lien placed on your Social Security number. Do you want me to read the lien number aloud, Preston? Or do you want to explain to your wife why the federal government was threatening to garnish her wages? Preston opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. He took another step backward, physically retreating from the undeniable truth printed on the pages in my hand. Chantel dropped her designer clutch. The expensive bag hit the marble floor with a dull thud, spilling her lipsticks and credit cards. She grabbed Preston by the arm, her voice trembling with a terrifying realization. "You told me your trust fund was just temporarily frozen in probate," she cried out, pulling at his sleeve. "You said your grandfather left a complicated estate, and the lawyers were just sorting out the tax implications. You promised me we would be buying a house in Milton by the spring." "There is no grandfather's estate, Chantel," I stated, plainly refusing to let him spin another web of lies. "His parents are rich, but they cut him off 2 years ago. I did the background check. You were too busy planning a lavish wedding to perform. His father gave him a strict ultimatum after he blew his college fund on failed tech ventures and reckless gambling. One more financial scandal and he would be permanently disinherited. So when the IRS came knocking last spring with a massive tax lien, he panicked. He could not ask his daddy for a bailout, so he targeted yours. He knew Valerie and Desmond were desperate to secure a white son-in-law with a Connecticut pedigree, so he played the part and took their money. Money that actually belonged to me." Chantel buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The golden child was finally facing the ugly reality that her perfect marriage was nothing but a transactional scam. I expected my parents to turn on him. I expected my father to grab Preston by the collar and demand his money back. I expected my mother to scream at the man who had defrauded her precious daughter and humiliated their family. But what happened next was a masterclass in absolute delusion. Valerie physically stepped between me and Preston, throwing her arms out as if she were shielding him from an attacker. "Stop this right now!" Zuri, my mother, hissed, her face contorted with misplaced anger. "You are taking this entirely out of context. You are trying to destroy your sister's marriage out of pure spite, just because you are bitter and alone." I stared at her, genuinely stunned by her reaction. "I just proved to you with federally audited bank statements that this man stole $40,000 of my money, which you handed to him, and you are defending him." My father Desmond stepped forward, joining his wife in forming a protective barrier around the fraudster who had bankrupted them. "Preston is an innovator, Zuri," my father declared, his booming voice returning as he tried to regain control of the narrative. "He is an entrepreneur. He just hit a rough patch in the market. The crypto economy is incredibly volatile right now. He was taking a calculated risk to double the investment for the family." I let out a harsh laugh, the sound bouncing off the high ceiling of the lobby. "A calculated risk," I repeated, shaking my head. "He paid off his back taxes to avoid federal prosecution, Desmond. That is not a startup investment. That is a criminal bailout." "You sit in an office all day, pushing numbers around on a screen," Valerie sneered, pointing a finger at my chest. "You do not understand how the world taking bold risks to build generational wealth for this family. He made a small mistake, but he is family. And in this church, in this community, we protect family. We do not drag them through the mud." The pure, unadulterated hypocrisy of her words hit me like a physical blow. The absolute anti-blackness and internalized racism embedded in my own parents' minds was fully on display. They would rather defend a mediocre white man who explicitly stole from them, lied to their daughter, and mocked them in their own home than acknowledge the brilliance of their own black daughter who literally bought the roof over their heads. They were willing to sacrifice my sanity, my peace, and my bank account just to maintain their proximity to his perceived whiteness and social status. "So you protect the white son-in-law who scammed you?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, unyielding pitch. "But you ban the black daughter who saved you from an eviction notice. You call a family meeting to tell me my energy does not fit your aesthetic, but you roll out the red carpet for a thief because he drives a leased Mercedes." "We did what was best for the family image," Desmond stated, stubbornly crossing his arms. "People respect Preston. People look up to us because of the connections he brings to our church." "Then let his connections turn your lights back on," I said, slamming the ledger shut. The sharp sound made them all flinch. "Zuri, please," Valerie begged, her tone shifting rapidly from angry to desperate as she realized I was not backing down. "You have made your point. You proved you are the smartest person in the room. Now please just call the power company. The temperature is dropping below freezing tonight. We cannot sleep in a house with no heat." "There will be no power restoration," I said, slipping the ledger back into my designer bag. "The electric company requires a valid credit card to clear the past due balance of $800. I suggest Preston use his visionary tech skills to generate some body heat for his wife." Desmond's face twisted with rage. "You cannot do this to us. We will sue you. We will take you to court for unlawful eviction. We have tenant rights." "You are not tenants, Desmond," I corrected smoothly. "You are guests living in a property owned by my corporate trust. And as of tonight, your welcome has officially expired. You have exactly 30 days to assume the mortgage under your own names. If you cannot secure financing by January 24th, the Blind Trust will formally begin eviction proceedings, and the property will be listed on the open market." Valerie gasped, clutching her chest, as if she were having a heart attack. "You are throwing your own parents out on the street." "I am simply applying your own logic, Mom," I replied, turning away from them. "I am protecting my assets. Have a wonderful holiday." Tyson placed a firm guiding hand on the small of my back, leading me toward the private elevator. The lobby security guard, seeing the conversation was over, stepped forward to escort my family toward the exit. "You will burn in hell for this, Zuri," my mother screamed as the polished steel doors of the elevator began to slide shut. "You are going to die alone and miserable." The doors sealed shut, cutting off her frantic shrieks. The elevator car ascended silently, carrying me away from the toxic anchor that had dragged me down for over 3 decades. I leaned against the cool metal wall, letting out a long, slow breath. Tyson pulled me into his arms, wrapping me in a warm, protective embrace. He kissed the top of my head, resting his chin against my hair. "You were magnificent," he murmured softly. "You excised the tumor with surgical precision." I closed my eyes, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was done. The facade was shattered. The bank was closed, and the truth was finally out in the open. When we returned to the penthouse, the silence was absolute bliss. We poured another glass of wine, sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows, and watched the city lights twinkle against the freezing winter night. I did not feel an ounce of guilt. I did not feel a shred of remorse. I just felt clean. We went to bed wrapped in high-thread count sheets. The warmth of the apartment, a stark contrast to the freezing dark mansion in the suburbs. The next morning was Christmas Day. I woke up slowly, the soft morning light filtering through the sheer curtains of the master bedroom. The air was peaceful and quiet. Tyson was already awake, bringing a tray with fresh coffee and pastries into the room. I stretched, smiling as the aroma of roasted coffee beans filled the space. But the peace did not last long. As I reached for my coffee cup, a harsh, vibrating sound shattered the quiet morning. I looked over at my nightstand. My cell phone, which had been completely silent since the lobby confrontation, was suddenly dancing aggressively across the wooden surface. The screen lit up with an endless, rapid-fire stream of notifications. Text messages from numbers I had not spoken to in years were flooding my screen. Direct messages from social media applications were popping up by the dozen. Missed call alerts stacked one on top of the other in a terrifying tower of digital noise. I picked up the phone, my brow furrowing in confusion. I unlocked the screen and opened the first message. It was from a senior deacon at my parents' church, a man who had known me since I was a child. The message contained a link to a Facebook video and a single sentence that made the blood freeze in my veins. "How could you do something so evil to your own flesh and blood on the Lord's birthday?" I tapped the link the senior deacon had sent me, and the screen immediately shifted to Facebook. There was my sister Chantel broadcasting live to her thousands of followers, and essentially the entire congregation of my father's megachurch. She looked like a complete mess, which I knew took her at least 45 minutes to perfectly stage. She was wrapped in a thick wool blanket, shivering dramatically in front of the dark, unlit fireplace of the Buckhead mansion. Her phone camera shook just enough to make it look authentic and raw. I turned up the volume. Chantel was sobbing into the lens, telling a highly fabricated horror story about how her cruel, jealous older sister hacked into their bank accounts and stole the family's generational wealth out of pure spite. She wiped a single tear from her cheek, sniffling as she spun her web of lies. My sister could not handle seeing me happily married to Preston, Chantel cried to her audience, her voice cracking with manufactured grief. She has always resented that Preston comes from a prominent Connecticut family while she is still alone. So last night on Christmas Eve, she used her access at the financial firm to illegally freeze all of our accounts. She shut off our power. She left my husband and my parents freezing in the dark because she is so consumed by bitterness. It was a masterful performance. She weaponized her tears to garner ultimate sympathy, playing the innocent victim while painting me as the angry, jealous black woman who wanted to destroy her own flesh and blood. I scrolled down to the comments section. Hundreds of people were reacting. People who had smiled in my face during church functions were now typing lengthy paragraphs condemning me. Women from the usher board, deacons, who played golf with my father, and former high school classmates, who had not spoken to me in a decade, suddenly had loud, aggressive opinions. They called me a disgrace to the community for abandoning my family. They truly believed I was a corporate villain, hoarding money that rightfully belonged to my humble, hardworking parents. They bought the aesthetic hook, line, and sinker. But the comment pinned right at the very top of the live feed was the one that made my blood run ice cold. It was from my mother, Valerie. "We pray for her bitter soul," Valerie had written. "God sees the wicked, and he will restore what the enemy has stolen from this family. Please keep Desmond and our household in your prayers today." Tyson leaned over my shoulder, reading the digital circus playing out on my screen. He let out a sharp, cynical laugh. "Your mother is invoking the Lord to cover up federal tax evasion and a bounced catering check," he said, shaking his head. "That takes a special kind of religious delusion. To use her standing in the church to publicly crucify you while she knows you hold the receipts is bold." My inbox was a toxic wasteland of notifications. Direct messages flooded in from people I barely knew, demanding I repent and turn my parents' power back on. One church elder sent me a massive block of text, quoting scripture about honoring thy father and mother, warning me that God would strip away my wealth if I did not humble myself. My father was clearly using his deacon status to rally the congregation against me, framing himself as a righteous man under spiritual attack from his own greedy daughter. The old me would have drafted a furious response. I would have taken screenshots of the wire transfers to defend my name. I would have gone live on my own page and argued with strangers on the internet to prove I was the actual victim. I would have desperately tried to show everyone that Preston was a fraud who used my money to pay off the IRS. But standing in my warm, sunlit penthouse sipping freshly brewed coffee, I realized I had zero desire to participate in a public shouting match. I did not need to defend myself to a congregation that valued a shiny facade over the actual truth. Arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you is a phenomenal waste of time. They wanted a reality television show. I was running a financial institution. I locked my phone screen and set the device face down on the kitchen island. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the quiet city streets below. My mind replayed the events of the previous night. The chaotic lobby confrontation, Preston storming through the glass doors acting like he owned the building. My parents demanding I fix the glitch. How did they get to my secure downtown building so quickly after the power went out? They did not take a rideshare. Preston had loudly bragged about dropping his wealthy parents off at a luxury hotel before rushing over to confront me. They drove. They drove the sleek white Range Rover Chantel loved to flaunt on her social media pages. The same luxury SUV she had proudly claimed Preston bought for her as a surprise anniversary gift last spring. She had posted dozens of photos posing on the hood boasting about how a real man provides for his wife. A slow, highly calculated smile spread across my face. I turned away from the window and walked straight down the hallway to my home office. Tyson followed me, leaning against the doorframe as I booted up my primary workstation. He knew that specific look on my face. It was the look I had right before I dismantled a hostile corporate takeover. "What are you looking for?" he asked, crossing his arms over his chest. "I am looking for the truth about a Christmas gift," I replied, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I accessed the secure holding company files under my primary limited liability corporation, the same LLC I had used to quietly manage the overflow of debt my parents had accumulated over the past 3 years. I bypassed the real estate folder and clicked directly into the automotive asset ledger. I pulled up the vehicle registration documents, scrolling past the sedans and the company vehicles until I found exactly what I was looking for. There it was in stark black and white digital ink. The title, the premium insurance policy, and the active global positioning system tracking coordinates. Everything was legally registered exclusively to my company name. Preston had not bought that car. He did not have the credit score to buy a bicycle. My father had come to me crying about how Chantel needed a safe, reliable vehicle for her new lifestyle and begged me to secure the financing through my corporate fleet account. I had paid the massive down payment and every single monthly installment since. I tapped the screen, bringing up the live GPS location of the vehicle. The flashing red dot confirmed the white Range Rover was currently parked directly in the circular driveway of the dark, freezing Buckhead mansion. Chantel was inside the house, streaming her fabricated victim narrative to thousands of people while looking out the window at a luxury vehicle she did not own. "She wants to use the internet to tell everyone I stole from her," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, dangerous whisper. "I think it is time I actually take something back." I picked up my phone and bypassed my personal contacts, opening my encrypted business directory. I scrolled until I found the number for a premium heavy-duty towing and repossession company I kept on retainer for my commercial properties. They operated 24 hours a day, even on major holidays, because corporate asset recovery never sleeps. I pressed call and listened to the line ring. "This is going to be incredibly ugly," Tyson noted, a hint of profound respect in his voice as he watched me work. "It is going to be incredibly legal," I corrected him. "The bank is officially initiating the first stage of asset recovery. And since Chantel loves broadcasting her life to the church congregation, I am going to give them a spectacular Sunday morning show." I gave the dispatcher the exact global positioning coordinates of the white Range Rover. I authorized an immediate, non-negotiable commercial asset recovery. The dispatcher confirmed the vehicle was registered to my primary holding company and dispatched their closest flatbed tow truck. I hung up the phone and turned back to the window, watching the morning light begin to wash over the city. Tyson wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, pressing a warm kiss to my temple. I knew better than to ask if I felt guilty. Guilt was an emotion reserved for people who had done something wrong. I was simply retrieving stolen property. I picked up my phone again and dialed Auntie Denise. She answered before the second ring. I told her to get comfortable and keep her camera pointed directly at the driveway of the mansion. Denise chuckled, a low, rich sound that vibrated through the phone speaker. She was sitting in her sedan parked across the street from my parents' house, holding her favorite silver thermos. She took a long, slow sip of her spiked sweet tea and positioned her phone against the dashboard. The camera framed the massive brick house perfectly. It looked completely dead, without the landscape lighting and the holiday decorations. I could see the white Range Rover sitting proudly in the center of the circular driveway, a gleaming monument to Chantel's fake luxury lifestyle. Just as Denise settled in, a silver Mercedes pulled up and parked on the street right behind her. It was Preston and his wealthy Connecticut parents. They had clearly returned from their hotel to collect their remaining luggage and assess the damage from last night's disaster. Preston stepped out of the car looking exhausted and angry, while his mother wrapped her fur coat tightly around herself, staring at the dark house with absolute disdain. They were the perfect audience for what was about to happen. Chantel was still broadcasting her live video. I watched her feed on my secondary monitor while watching Denise's camera on my phone. Chantel was pacing back and forth on the front porch holding her phone high. She was crying to her followers, claiming that she was a victim of financial abuse. She told them how she had to sleep in a freezing bedroom because her cruel sister wanted to ruin her beautiful holiday. She pointed her camera at the Range Rover, telling her audience that at least she still had the beautiful gifts her loving husband provided for her. Less than 10 minutes later, a massive black flatbed tow truck rolled down the quiet suburban street. Its heavy diesel engine rumbled, disrupting the peaceful Christmas morning silence. The truck turned sharply into my parents' driveway, its bright yellow warning lights flashing aggressively. The strobe lights reflected off the dark windows of the mansion and illuminated the frosted lawn. The driver, a large no-nonsense man, stepped out of the cab and immediately began unspooling the heavy steel winch cable. He walked straight to the Range Rover, completely ignoring Preston, who was jogging up the driveway, waving his hands and shouting something about private property. The commotion instantly drew attention. Chantel dropped her victim persona and burst into an absolute panic. She ran down the front steps in her slippers, still holding her phone in front of her face. She started screaming at the tow truck driver, her shrill voice echoing down the entire block. Neighbors began stepping out onto their porches, clutching their morning coffees, wrapping their silk robes tighter as they watched the wealthy Thomas family endure a highly public repossession. "You cannot take that car," Chantel shrieked, pointing her phone camera directly at the tow driver. "That is my car. My husband bought that for me. This is illegal. You are stealing my vehicle on Christmas Day. I am streaming this to thousands of people right now." The driver did not even blink. He expertly hooked the heavy steel cables to the undercarriage of the luxury sport utility vehicle. He pulled a clipboard from his thick canvas jacket and held it up. "Ma'am, this vehicle is legally registered to a corporate limited liability company," he stated loudly, his voice carrying perfectly across the lawn. "The primary owner initiated an asset recovery due to unauthorized use. Step away from the vehicle or I will call the police to assist with the repossession." Preston froze, his face draining of all color. He looked back at his parents, who were standing on the sidewalk watching the entire scene unfold in absolute horror. They realized in real time that their son had not purchased a luxury vehicle for his wife. He was a fraud, and his wife was currently throwing a temper tantrum over a borrowed corporate car. His mother covered her mouth with her gloved hand, her eyes wide with shock and humiliation. Auntie Denise rolled down her car window, leaning her arm casually against the doorframe. She took another slow sip from her thermos, locking eyes with Chantel across the frost-covered grass. "Well, baby, the bank takes back what the bank owns," Denise called out, her voice ringing with pure, unapologetic satisfaction. Chantel whipped her head around, dropping her phone on the freezing concrete driveway. The screen shattered, but the live broadcast kept running, capturing the audio of her complete mental breakdown. She dropped to her knees on the frosted grass, sobbing uncontrollably as the hydraulic winch began dragging the pristine white Range Rover onto the flatbed. The sound of the metal scraping and the engine revving was absolute music to my ears. My father, Desmond, finally emerged from the dark house, marching down the driveway with his chest puffed out, trying to salvage whatever shred of dignity he had left. He adjusted his wrinkled suit jacket and approached the tow driver, preparing to use his booming deacon voice to stop the embarrassment. He demanded the driver release the vehicle immediately, citing his standing in the community and threatening severe legal action. But before he could even finish his self-righteous monologue, the driver handed him the corporate repossession order. Desmond stared at the paper, reading the name of my holding company, printed boldly at the top. The bluster vanished from his body. His shoulders slumped and he looked like a deflated balloon. He looked over at Preston's parents, who were shaking their heads in utter disgust before turning their backs and walking away toward their leased Mercedes. They got into their car and drove off, leaving Preston standing awkwardly in the driveway. Desmond was utterly humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood, stripped of his fake wealth and his religious superiority. I watched the tow truck pull away, carrying the last piece of their fabricated high society image down the street. Auntie Denise ended the video call with a cheerful wave, leaving me in the quiet warmth of my penthouse. Tyson handed me a fresh cup of coffee, pressing a kiss to my shoulder. My phone chimed with a new incoming email marked urgent. I opened it to find a formal calendar invitation from my father. It was a summons for an emergency family meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning in the executive conference room of his megachurch. The message attached was brief and steeped in toxic religious manipulation. We are meeting with the pastor to discuss your wicked actions and force you to repent for destroying this family. The Greater Grace Fellowship Center was less of a church and more of a corporate fortress built on the backs of working-class tithes. I walked through the towering glass doors with Tyson right beside me. We did not dress for Sunday service. We dressed for a boardroom slaughter. My tailored charcoal suit and Tyson's sharp navy blazer were a stark contrast to the performative Sunday best my family was undoubtedly wearing to play the role of humble victims. A junior usher, wide-eyed and visibly intimidated by our energy, quickly escorted us to the executive conference room on the third floor. I pushed open the heavy double doors without knocking, letting them hit the walls with a loud, definitive thud. My family was already seated, waiting to stage their holy ambush. Desmond and Valerie sat on one side of a massive, polished mahogany table. They looked incredibly smug, radiating a toxic cocktail of false piety and misplaced confidence. Valerie wore a modest but expensive pearl gray dress, clutching a leather-bound Bible to her chest like a theatrical prop. My father, Desmond, had his hands folded piously in front of him, wearing a dark suit that I knew for a fact was purchased on the credit line I had just frozen. Chantel sat next to them, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, playing the part of the traumatized golden child. Preston was notably absent. I knew exactly why the arrogant white son-in-law had not shown his face. He was hiding in whatever cheap motel his parents had abandoned him in, too terrified to face the financial ruin I had dragged into the light. He had lost his fake trust fund facade and his stolen luxury car in less than 24 hours, and his fragile ego had completely shattered. At the head of the long table sat Pastor Sterling. He was a man who built a sprawling empire on prosperity gospel and emotional manipulation. He gave me a warm, practiced smile that did not reach his calculating eyes. He gestured to the empty chairs opposite my parents with a grand, sweeping motion. "Zuri, my child, please come in and take a seat." Pastor Sterling said, his voice dropping into that soothing, rhythmic cadence he used to extract donations from the congregation. "We have been waiting for you." I did not take the specific chair he offered. I pulled out the chair directly across from my father, ensuring I had a dead center view of his face. Tyson sat beside me, placing his slim leather briefcase on the table with a soft but commanding snap. Pastor Sterling steepled his fingers, resting his elbows on the mahogany surface. He closed his eyes and began the meeting with a highly performative prayer. He asked the Lord to soften hardened hearts, to cast out the spirits of greed and division, and to remind us all of the sacred bonds of family. It was a thinly veiled attack wrapped in holy language designed to put me on the defensive before I even opened my mouth. When he finally said amen, he looked at me with deep manufactured disappointment. "Zuri, your parents came to me this morning in a state of profound spiritual distress," Pastor Sterling began, shaking his head slowly. "They shared the unfortunate events of the past 48 hours. Shutting off the power to your family home on the eve of our Savior's birth is a heavy burden to place on your own soul. You have been blessed with a lucrative career in the secular world, but we cannot allow worldly wealth to corrupt our moral compass. The Bible tells us in Ephesians to honor thy father and mother so that it may go well with thee. You have strayed far from the light, my sister." I stared at him, my expression perfectly neutral. I had sat in the pews of this building for 20 years, listening to this man preach about integrity, while I watched my father use church funds to secure prime tea times at the local country club. I was absolutely immune to their spiritual gaslighting. My father took his cue, sensing the pastor had laid the necessary groundwork. He leaned forward, his face twisting into a mask of sorrowful paternal sacrifice. "We raised her, Pastor Desmond," said, his voice breaking with theatrical grief. "We gave her a beautiful childhood. We put food on the table and clothes on her back when times were hard. We encouraged her to study finance even when her ideas seemed a bit too aggressive. And how does she repay us? With wicked greed. She used her corporate connections at her firm to illegally freeze our banking accounts and terrorize her own sister, simply because we asked her to be a bit more positive during the holidays. She has turned her back on her own blood out of pure spite." Valerie eagerly jumped into the performance, reaching out to pat Desmond's arm sympathetically. "It is pure jealousy," Pastor, my mother chimed in, her voice quivering perfectly on cue. "Zuri has always harbored such darkness in her heart. She cannot stand to see Chantel happily married. She wants to destroy the beautiful, blessed union Chantel and Preston have built together. She even hired criminal thugs to steal Chantel's car right off our driveway yesterday morning in broad daylight. We have been praying for her bitter soul all night, but I fear the devil has truly taken hold of her finances." Chantel sniffled loudly, crumpling her tissue and looking up at the pastor with wide, innocent eyes. "Preston is so devastated by my sister's cruelty, he could not even get out of bed to come here today," Chantel cried, spinning a ridiculous lie to cover up her husband's cowardice. "His pride is completely shattered. Zuri humiliated us in front of his wealthy family and totally ruined my holiday aesthetic. I just want my Range Rover back, Pastor. It was an anniversary gift from my husband and she stole it because she is miserable and alone." I let the silence hang in the room for a long, heavy moment after Chantel finished her ridiculous performance. I looked at the pastor, watching him nod sympathetically at my family's fabricated trauma. "Is that what they told you, Pastor Sterling?" I asked, my voice smooth and devoid of any emotion. "They told you that I hacked a bank to steal a luxury car out of spite because my feelings were hurt over a Christmas dinner." Pastor Sterling offered a patronizing smile, leaning back in his plush leather chair. "They mentioned a minor misunderstanding over a holiday dinner, Zuri. But no family disagreement justifies financial violence against your own parents. We are here today to guide you back to the path of righteousness, to help you repent, release the frozen accounts, and return the vehicle to your sister's husband before this escalates to a legal matter that damages the reputation of this church." Tyson let out a low, sharp laugh. It was a dark, cutting sound that completely shattered the holy atmosphere of the room. Desmond glared at him, but Tyson did not even blink. "The vehicle belongs to a corporate limited liability company registered in the state of Georgia," Tyson stated, his voice cutting through the room like a surgical blade. "My client reclaimed her own corporate asset due to unauthorized use by non-employees. And as for the bank accounts, she did not hack them. She legally owns them." Pastor Sterling frowned, his patronizing smile faltering as confusion set in. He glanced at Desmond, who suddenly looked incredibly nervous, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "What is your attorney talking about?" Desmond the pastor asked, his tone shifting from pastoral to suspicious. "They did not tell you the whole truth, Pastor," I said smoothly, reaching for the zipper of my designer bag. "In fact, they did not tell you any of the truth. They brought you in here to bully me with misapplied scripture because their credit cards declined, and their massive scam was finally exposed. But since we are sitting in the house of the Lord, I think it is only fitting that we bring absolutely everything into the light." I reached into my bag and pulled out a sleek silver mini projector. I placed it firmly on the polished mahogany table, pointing the lens directly at the blank white wall behind Pastor Sterling, and pressed play. The audio from the mini projector filled the heavy silence of the executive conference room. There was no video, just a sharp digital waveform bouncing across the blank white wall, perfectly synced to the sound of my mother's voice. "Zuri Preston's parents are flying down from Connecticut tomorrow, and Chantel is stressed trying to make everything flawless. We all had a family meeting and agreed your energy just does not fit the aesthetic this year. You are always so serious and it brings down the mood. You are not welcome at Christmas dinner. Just drop your gifts on the porch by noon. We will send you some leftovers. Love you, bye." The recording ended with a sharp metallic click. The echo faded into the high vaulted ceiling of the church office. For a moment nobody moved. The air in the room became incredibly thin. I reached over and tapped the power button on the projector, casting the room back into its normal lighting. I looked directly at Pastor Sterling. His hands were still steepled together on the polished mahogany table, but his patronizing smile had completely vanished. The look of manufactured pastoral concern had been replaced by a rigid, uncomfortable shock. He slowly turned his head to look at my parents. Valerie scrambled first. She practically leaped out of her leather chair, her hands fluttering wildly as she tried to reconstruct her shattered pious image. "Pastor," she stammered, her voice tight and frantic. "Pastor Sterling, please, you have to understand the context of that message." I was incredibly stressed. Hosting a holiday gathering is overwhelming, and Zuri has always been so combative. I left a private voicemail in a moment of maternal exhaustion. She is twisting a private family disagreement to justify her wicked financial terrorism. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. My calm destroyed her panic. "Out of context, Valerie," I asked, leaning forward slightly. "Which part was out of context? The part where you banned me from the house because I do not fit the Connecticut country club aesthetic your white son-in-law demands? Or the part where you told this entire congregation that I missed Christmas Eve service because I was too obsessed with counting my secular dollars to spend time with my loving family?" My father slammed his fist down on the table, causing the water glasses to rattle. "That is enough," Desmond barked, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You will not interrogate your mother in the house of the Lord. You froze our bank accounts, Zuri. You stole Chantel's car off our driveway. You committed fraud to punish us for a simple scheduling conflict, and now you are trying to manipulate our pastor with a recorded phone call." Tyson did not say a word. He simply unclasped his slim leather briefcase. The quiet metallic snap drew every eye in the room. He reached inside and pulled out a thick bound stack of documents. The cover page bore the official seal of my wealth management firm and the certified stamp of an independent financial auditor. Tyson slid the heavy stack of papers across the long mahogany table. It glided perfectly, stopping exactly an inch from Pastor Sterling's folded hands. Desmond lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers before the pastor could touch them. "Pastor Sterling, you do not need to look at her fabricated numbers," Desmond shouted, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "She is trying to poison this mediation with fake spreadsheets. She hacked our accounts." Tyson shifted his weight just enough to block my father's sightline, his dark eyes flashing with a silent warning that made Desmond freeze in his tracks. "The documents are certified by a federal auditor," Tyson stated, his voice a low, commanding rumble that completely dominated the room. "Falsifying those documents carries a mandatory minimum sentence in federal prison. I assure you, Deacon Thomas, my client does not commit felonies. I suggest you sit down before you embarrass yourself further." Desmond slowly sank back into his chair, his chest heaving as he stared at the thick stack of paper. Pastor Sterling carefully adjusted his suit jacket and pulled the documents toward him. He flipped open the heavy cover. I kept my eyes locked on my father, watching his decades of carefully curated religious arrogance bleed out of his body. "I did not steal anything," I said, my voice ringing with absolute clarity. "You cannot steal what already belongs to you. Turn to page 4, Pastor." The sound of the thick paper turning was the only noise in the room. "That is the official notice of default and foreclosure from the County Tax Commissioner dated October of 2023, I explained. "The exact same month my father stood at your pulpit, Pastor, and claimed a miraculous corporate sponsor had paid off the church community center. He stood up there and accepted the applause of 2,000 people. But he did not tell you that he had secretly mortgaged his own home to the breaking point to fund his image. I did not tell you he was 90 days away from being thrown out on the street." Valerie covered her face with her hands, letting out a muffled sob. Chantel stared at me, her mouth hanging open, completely paralyzed by the exposure of her perfect life. "I bought the house," I stated, driving the final nail into their coffin of lies. "I structured a blind trust and purchased the debt to save them from a public scandal. I own the mortgage. I own the white Range Rover Chantel has been parading around town. I fund the lifestyle they use to impress this church and every single one of their high society friends." Pastor Sterling stared at the bank statements, his eyes widening as he read the highlighted wire transfers. He saw the monthly deposits from my corporate holding account, directly covering my parents' utility bills, their luxury car leases, and the massive recurring credit card payments. I flipped the narrative they had spent years building and tore it down to the studs. While they sat in this office telling you I was a struggling failure, who had strayed from the path I was literally cashing out my own investments to keep their lights on. I continued refusing to let them look away. They took my money every single month. They used it to buy their positions on the usher board. They used it to fund Chantel's lavish wedding to a man who secretly uses my parents to pay off his own tax liens. And in return, they told me my energy was too ghetto for their Christmas dinner. They took my money and then they locked me out in the cold. Chantel suddenly slammed her hands on the table, her sequined blouse catching the harsh fluorescent light of the conference room. "You are lying!" she shrieked, her voice entirely unhinged. "Preston is a successful entrepreneur. His family is loaded. He does not need your dirty money. You are just trying to ruin my marriage because nobody wants you." I looked at my younger sister with pure, undisturbed pity. "Turn to page 12, Pastor," I instructed, ignoring Chantel's outburst entirely. The pastor flipped the pages, his breathing becoming noticeably heavier. "You will see a direct wire transfer of $40,000 from my secondary trust account to my parents' checking account," I explained. "And exactly 24 hours later, you will see that exact same amount wired to a limited liability company registered to Preston." My parents begged me for an emergency loan, claiming the church needed a mandatory donation. Instead, they handed my money to their white son-in-law so he could pay off the Internal Revenue Service and avoid federal tax evasion charges. Pastor Sterling's head snapped up. He looked directly at Desmond, his expression transforming from pastoral shock to absolute, unadulterated disgust. The pastor was a man who understood the language of money and power better than anyone. He realized in that exact moment that his most prominent deacon was not a wealthy benefactor. Desmond was a broke, desperate fraud who had lied to the church hierarchy and used stolen family funds to buy his seat at the executive table. Deacon Thomas, the pastor, said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Is this true? Did you lie to the executive board about your financial standing? Did you funnel money through this church to cover up your son-in-law's criminal tax debts?" Desmond opened his mouth, but his signature booming voice was gone. He stammered, his hands shaking as he gripped the edge of the mahogany table. "Pastor, I can explain," he pleaded, a pathetic sheen of sweat covering his forehead. "It was a temporary liquidity issue. We were protecting the family image. We intended to pay her back." "You intended to discard me," I corrected him coldly. "You intended to drain my accounts until there was nothing left, and then smile for the congregation while I went bankrupt." "But the bank is closed, Desmond. The funding is officially terminated." The silence that settled over the conference room was absolute and devastating. The holy intervention they had planned had become their own financial execution. Valerie was openly weeping into her hands, no longer caring about her ruined makeup. Desmond stared blankly at the polished wood table, watching his entire identity disintegrate. Chantel was frozen, her chest heaving, as the reality of her husband's massive scam finally took root in her mind. The heavy, suffocating quiet was suddenly shattered. A loud, jarring ringtone pierced the air. It was a generic, upbeat pop song echoing sharply against the glass walls of the conference room. Everyone jumped. Chantel scrambled, reaching into her designer purse with trembling fingers. She pulled out her phone, staring at the glowing screen. The blood completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. Her eyes darted wildly toward me, then to my parents. She did not answer it, but the caller identification was visible to everyone at the table. It was Preston. Chantel stared at her phone screen as it vibrated against the polished mahogany table. The name Preston flashed brightly, illuminating her terrified face. She did not want to answer it, but the silence in the executive conference room was so absolute that the ringing sounded like a fire alarm. She reached out with trembling fingers and pressed accept, putting the call on speakerphone out of pure panicked instinct. Preston did not say hello. He did not ask if she was okay. His voice tore through the audio speaker, frantic and completely unhinged. "Chantel, you need to get your father to wire me $50,000 right now." Chantel choked back a sob, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the edge of the table. "Preston, what are you talking about? Where are you?" "I am standing in the parking lot of a cheap motel," Preston shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "My parents saw the video, Chantel. They saw that ridiculous woman from your family recording my car being towed away on a flatbed. My father called his private wealth manager to run a check on the license plate and they found everything. They found the tax liens. They found the offshore crypto accounts. They know about the IRS. Chantel looked like she was going to be physically sick. Her chest heaved as she stared at the phone. But your trust fund? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. You said your grandfather left you an estate. There is no trust fund, Preston screamed, cutting her off completely. My father just formally disowned me. He locked me out of the family estate accounts and told the hotel concierge to throw my bags onto the sidewalk. I have exactly $42 in my checking account. I need you to ask Desmond to liquidate some of his church assets and send me cash today before the federal government puts a freeze on my social security number. The raw, unfiltered audacity of his demand hung in the air. He was a white man who had scammed my black parents out of $40,000, and his first instinct upon being caught was to demand $50,000 more. Chantel let out a guttural, devastating wail. She grabbed the phone, bringing it close to her mouth, her flawless aesthetic completely shattered. My father does not have any assets. Preston, she shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. He is broke. We are all broke. Zuri owns the house. Zuri owns the car. Zuri owns everything. You lied to me. You told me you were building an empire. There was a dead pause on the other end of the line. The reality of his situation finally caught up to his profound arrogance. You mean your family has no money? Preston asked, his tone dropping from demanding to utterly terrified. We have nothing, Chantel sobbed, dropping her head onto the mahogany table. The line went dead. Preston hung up. He realized the wealthy black family he had been leeching off of was entirely funded by the one woman he had spent the last 3 years insulting. He was cut off from his own family, and now his backup bank was officially closed. Chantel threw her phone across the table. The device slid across the polished wood and slammed into my mini projector. She turned on our mother, her face twisted with a level of rage I had never seen from the golden child. You did this to me, Chantel screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at Valerie. You told me to marry him. You told me to ignore the fact that he never paid for dinner because his last name would open doors for us in Atlanta society. You pushed me to lock down a man from Connecticut so you could brag to your sorority sisters. You sold me to a fraud just so you could look good at the country club. Valerie scrambled backward in her leather chair, her hands flying up to her face. Chantel, darling, please, she pleaded, her voice tight and defensive. I did not know. We thought he was just experiencing a temporary liquidity issue. We thought we were investing in your future. You invested in a criminal, Chantel yelled, hitting the table with her palms. And you used Zuri's money to do it. You made me look like an absolute fool. My entire life is a joke. I watched the implosion with absolute clinical detachment. For 32 years, Valerie and Desmond had curated a pristine, flawless image at my expense. They had demanded perfection while burying their own massive failures. Now the bill had come due and the interest rate was catastrophic. Pastor Sterling slowly pushed his heavy leather chair back from the table. The subtle sound of the chair wheels rolling against the expensive carpet drew everyone's attention. He stood up, brushing an invisible piece of lint from his custom-tailored suit. His face was a mask of cold corporate detachment. The warm, soothing cadence he used during his Sunday sermons was completely gone. Desmond, my father, scrambled to his feet, instantly recognizing the shift in the room's power dynamic. Pastor, please. Desmond begged, reaching out a hand. This is just a private family matter. The enemy is trying to sow discord in our household today. We just need to pray on this. My wife and I will seek spiritual counseling. We can make a special donation to the building fund to show our continued commitment to this ministry. Pastor Sterling looked at my father with a level of disgust, normally reserved for something scraped off the bottom of a shoe. You will not be making any donations to this ministry, Brother Desmond, the pastor said pointedly, stripping my father of his deacon title in a single breath. And you will certainly not be using stolen funds to buy your way back into my good graces. Desmond recoiled as if he had been physically struck. Pastor, I have served this church for 20 years. I sit on the executive board. You sat on the executive board, Pastor Sterling corrected, his voice ringing with absolute finality. You sat at my table and looked me in the eye while claiming God had blessed your finances. You allowed this congregation to applaud your business acumen while you were secretly funneling money from your estranged daughter to cover up federal tax evasion for a white con artist. You endangered the reputation of this church. You endangered my reputation. Valerie stood up, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. Pastor Sterling, you cannot do this, she cried, her voice cracking with desperation. We built the women's auxiliary program. We hosted the charity galas. You know our hearts. I know your liability, Pastor Sterling stated brutally, prioritizing his church empire over their fabricated friendship. The executive board will receive a formal notification of your immediate removal this afternoon. You will be politely asked to step down due to personal health reasons. If you attempt to fight this decision or cause a scene in my sanctuary, I will personally ensure the congregation knows exactly why you were dismissed. Do not contact my office again. The pastor did not look at me. He did not offer a parting prayer. He simply turned on his heel and walked out of the conference room. The heavy double doors clicked shut behind him, echoing with a loud, terrifying finality. My parents' social standing, their entire identity, evaporated in less than 60 seconds. The church was their kingdom, and they had just been permanently exiled. Desmond slowly sank back into his chair. His broad shoulders completely collapsed. He looked like an old, broken man. The booming, confident patriarch who had constantly belittled my career choices was gone, replaced by a terrified fraud who had just lost everything he valued. Valerie slowly turned her head to look at me. Her sadness vanished instantly, replaced by a toxic, burning rage. This was her default setting whenever she lost control. Are you happy now, Zuri? My mother hissed, gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Are you satisfied? You came in here and destroyed our standing in the church. You ruined your sister's marriage. You humiliated us in front of the pastor. You stripped your father of his title. You tore this family apart just to prove a point. I did not tear anything apart, Valerie. I replied, my voice completely calm and devoid of sympathy. You built a house of cards on a foundation of lies, and I simply opened a window. You ruined Chantel's marriage the moment you prioritized a white man's perceived status over your own daughter's financial safety. You stripped Dad of his title the moment you chose to lie to the church executive board instead of admitting you needed help. You did this to yourselves. I just provided the receipts. Desmond looked up, his eyes red and bloodshot. You are my daughter, Zuri, he pleaded, attempting one last desperate play for authority. You are my flesh and blood. You cannot leave us like this. We will lose everything. The country club, the social circles, the respect of the community. We will be laughingstocks. I looked at the man who had gladly watched me work 80-hour weeks to build a life from scratch, only to tell me my energy did not fit his aesthetic. You lost my respect years ago, Desmond, I stated plainly. You just finally lost everyone else's today. Tyson, who had remained a silent, lethal presence beside me throughout the entire execution, smoothly unclasped his leather briefcase one more time. He reached inside and pulled out 3 crisp manila folders. He placed them in a neat stack in front of me, perfectly aligned on the mahogany table. I picked up my laptop and closed it with a soft, satisfying snap. I slid the mini projector into my designer bag. Then I picked up the stack of manila folders and slid them across the polished wood directly into the center of the table where my mother, father, and sister could see them. You wanted to mediate, I said, standing up and smoothing the front of my tailored charcoal suit. Fine, here are the formal eviction notices. The 30 days following the implosion at the church executive conference room were an absolute masterclass in toxic desperation. Once my parents realized the bank accounts were permanently closed and the eviction notices were legally binding, they unleashed a hurricane of emotional manipulation. My phone was bombarded with voicemails from distant relatives I had not spoken to since high school. Cousins who had never once called to wish me a happy birthday suddenly had deep, burning opinions about honoring my parents. The flying monkeys descended in full force. Deacons from the church sent me long, preachy emails claiming that grace and forgiveness were required for my soul to find peace, and that God would surely punish my finances if I did not restore my father to his rightful home. I did not respond to a single one of them. I simply forwarded every email, every voicemail, and every threatening text message directly to Tyson. Tyson operated with the lethal efficiency of a man who handled billion-dollar corporate mergers for a living. He drafted severe cease and desist orders on his firm's heavy watermarked stationery and dispatched them via certified mail to every single person who tried to harass me. He made it explicitly clear that any further contact would be treated as coordinated financial harassment and would be met with an immediate civil lawsuit. The barrage of fake righteous indignation stopped almost overnight when those church gossips realized their interference could cost them their own bank accounts. When the flying monkeys failed, Desmond and Valerie tried to bypass my legal shield directly. My father actually had the audacity to show up at the reception desk of my wealth management firm on day 15, holding a pathetic handwritten business proposal. He told my security team he wanted to pitch me a community investment opportunity to save the family home. He wanted me to partner with him on a new youth center initiative, hoping to funnel the theoretical profits straight into his own empty pockets to pay off the mortgage I already owned. I did not even go down to the lobby to look at his face. I had my head of security hand him a printed copy of the formal eviction countdown calendar and escort him off the corporate premises in front of my entire staff. Valerie took a completely different route. She bypassed the business angle and went straight for the emotional jugular. She sent me a long, weeping voice note claiming her blood pressure was dangerously high and that the stress of packing was going to induce a fatal heart attack. She begged me for just a 6-month extension so they could secure new financing to buy the house back from my trust. But I knew she had not spoken to a single mortgage broker because no bank in the country would lend to them. She was just stalling, hoping I would magically revert to the compliant silent bank I used to be. I instructed Tyson to send her a formal notice that any medical emergencies should be directed to a hospital because my firm was not a healthcare provider. During this 30-day scramble, the truth about Chantel and Preston reached its inevitable miserable conclusion. Preston had demanded a $50,000 wire transfer from a cheap motel room and hung up the moment he realized the Thomas family money well was completely dry. He never went back to the Buckhead mansion. He did not return for his tailored clothes, his expensive golf clubs, or his completely clueless wife. He vanished without a trace. Auntie Denise called me on day 20, giving me the glorious, devastating details. Preston had apparently convinced a wealthy friend from his old Connecticut country club days to buy him a one-way plane ticket to California. He left Chantel a harsh 2-line text message saying he needed to find himself and that he would send her divorce papers when he got settled on the West Coast. The golden child who had spent 3 years flaunting her elite marriage to a white man of supposed high society was dumped via text message the second her stolen corporate vehicle was towed away. She was entirely alone, trapped in a freezing mansion with parents who could no longer afford to buy her fake affection. Day 30 finally arrived. The weather in Atlanta was bitterly cold, matching the exact temperature of my mood. I pulled my luxury sport utility vehicle onto the familiar suburban street right before 9 in the morning. I did not bring a professional moving crew to assist them. I brought a property management inspector to change the locks the moment the clock struck noon. I parked my vehicle at the bottom of the circular driveway and simply watched the reality of their choices unfold. The scene playing out in front of the grand brick mansion was a devastating portrait of financial ruin. There were no premium moving trucks. There were no white-glove delivery services carefully wrapping their expensive art and custom furniture. Desmond had rented a cheap, battered yellow box truck that was currently parked on the dying winter grass, destroying the landscaping my mother used to obsess over. My father was struggling to carry a heavy cardboard box down the front steps, his face drenched in cold sweat. He was not wearing his custom-tailored deacon suits today. He was wearing baggy sweatpants and a faded college sweatshirt, looking entirely stripped of his pride and arrogance. Valerie followed closely behind him, clutching a black plastic garbage bag full of her designer shoes, because she could not afford proper wardrobe boxes. The pristine aesthetic she had worshipped her entire life was completely gone. They were shoving their belongings into the back of the rusted rental truck, arguing with each other in harsh, bitter whispers. Chantel emerged from the heavy mahogany front doors, looking absolutely unrecognizable. The woman who had thrown a massive tantrum over her ruined Instagram holiday dinner was currently dragging a torn laundry bag down the driveway. Her hair was tied up in a messy knot, and her face was completely bare of any makeup. She looked utterly defeated. She dragged her bag of clothes toward the truck, refusing to make eye contact with our parents. She had loudly blamed them for forcing her to marry a fraud, to boost their church status, and the tension between the three of them was so thick it could choke you. I stepped out of my vehicle, leaning casually against the driver's side door. The crisp morning air bit at my cheeks, but the warmth of my cashmere coat shielded me perfectly. The sharp sound of my car door shutting echoed loudly in the quiet suburban neighborhood, causing all three of them to freeze in their tracks. Desmond dropped his cardboard box onto the concrete driveway. He stared at me, his jaw clenching with pure, unadulterated resentment. He wanted to shout at me. He wanted to use his booming voice to command me to leave the premises, but he had absolutely zero power left. He was standing on property that legally belonged to my firm, and he knew any aggressive move would result in an immediate police escort. He swallowed his immense pride, turned his back, and hoisted the box into the truck in utter silence. Valerie, however, could not handle the silence. She dropped her garbage bag of shoes and marched down the driveway toward me. Her face was twisted with a toxic mixture of grief and pure hatred. She stopped 10 feet away from my vehicle, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. "Are you happy now?" Zuri, my mother, spat, her voice raw and scratching against the cold air. "Are you thoroughly satisfied watching your own family get thrown out onto the street like common criminals? You came down here just to gloat. You came down here to watch us suffer because you have a black heart." I did not raise my voice. I looked at the woman who had spent 32 years telling me I was a failure while secretly living on my dime. "I came down here to collect the keys, Valerie," I stated plainly, extending my open hand, "and to ensure the property is fully vacated by the deadline. You are not on the street. You are moving into the cramped two-bedroom apartment you secured in Decatur. I know exactly where you are going, because my firm had to approve the landlord reference check you submitted last week." Valerie flinched, stepping back as if my words physically struck her. "You destroyed this family," she cried out, her voice cracking as a single tear rolled down her cheek. "You ruined your sister's life by exposing Preston, and you ruined your father's life by getting him removed from the church. You think your money makes you powerful, Zuri, but you are just cruel. You have all this wealth and this successful business, but look at what it cost you. You severed your own bloodline." I kept my hand extended, entirely unmoved by her performative tears. "The keys, Valerie." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the heavy brass key ring. She threw it at my feet, the metal clattering loudly against the cold concrete driveway. She pointed a shaking finger directly at my face, her eyes burning with a desperate need to inflict one last wound. "You are going to be alone forever, Zuri. No family." Valerie's face contorted with a toxic mixture of bitterness and desperation. The words hung in the freezing air, meant to be a curse, meant to terrify me into submission. "You are going to be alone forever, Zuri. No family." She wanted me to break. She wanted me to fall to my knees and beg for the scraps of conditional affection she had dangled over my head for 3 decades. But I did not feel fear. I felt an overwhelming wave of absolute clarity. I turned my head away from the woman who had birthed me and looked toward my luxury sport utility vehicle. Tyson was leaning against the passenger side door, his dark overcoat completely immaculate, holding 2 hot cups of artisanal coffee he had picked up on the way. Next to him stood Auntie Denise, wearing her favorite faux fur coat, laughing out loud at a joke Tyson had just made. They were relaxed, happy, and completely unbothered by the toxic theater playing out on the concrete driveway. They did not care about social climbing or country club politics. They just cared about me. I turned back to Valerie, looking her directly in the eyes. "I am not alone, Mom," I said, my voice steady and perfectly clear. "I just finally took out the trash." Valerie flinched violently, as if I had physically struck her across the face. Her mouth opened, but she had absolutely no manipulative words left to deploy. Desmond looked away, staring at the rusted yellow rental truck, unable to meet the gaze of the daughter he had tried to exploit. Chantel just stood there, shivering in the bitter cold, gripping her cheap torn laundry bag, her illusions of grandeur completely shattered. I did not wait for another response. I turned on my heel, walked to my car, and slid into the heated leather driver's seat. Tyson got in beside me, handing me a warm cup of coffee, and Auntie Denise climbed into the spacious back seat. I started the engine, the powerful motor purring to life with a satisfying rumble. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the Buckhead mansion without checking my rearview mirror a single time. I did not need to look back because there was absolutely nothing left for me there. The resolution phase of my plan moved with ruthless corporate efficiency. The property management company listed the mansion that same afternoon. Because it was located in one of the most highly coveted zip codes in Atlanta, the house sparked a massive bidding war. It sold in exactly 14 days. It was a completely clean all-cash offer from a corporate executive relocating down from Chicago. When the closing documents were finalized by the escrow attorneys, the funds hit my primary holding account with a highly satisfying digital notification. I did not let that massive influx of capital sit idle. I immediately redirected the profit into a commercial real estate venture I had been aggressively researching for months. I purchased a stunning 3-story brick and glass commercial building right in the heart of Midtown Atlanta. It featured massive floor-to-ceiling windows, industrial exposed brick walls, and an open-concept layout that flooded with natural sunlight. It would serve as the new permanent headquarters for my growing wealth management firm. But it was not just a modern office space. I expanded my corporate mission, dedicating the entire second floor to a financial literacy and investment incubator specifically designed for Black women. I wanted to teach other women how to build their own tables, how to read the fine print, and how to protect their assets from anyone who tried to exploit them, including their own predatory relatives. We launched a specialized educational program teaching women how to secure their capital against financial manipulation. I took the ultimate symbol of my parents' fake high society life, their precious Buckhead mansion, and transformed it into a weapon of genuine economic empowerment for my community. I was taking the pain they caused me and turning it into collective power. As for my biological family, the consequences of their actions settled over them like a permanent suffocating winter. Desmond tried to leverage his old church contacts to secure a high-paying executive consulting role, but word travels incredibly fast in Atlanta. Nobody wanted to associate with a disgraced former deacon who had been caught committing financial fraud to protect a scam artist's son-in-law. I ended up taking a mid-level administrative job at a regional logistics company, making a tiny fraction of his former salary. He had to clock in at 8 every morning, under a manager who was 20 years younger than him. Valerie completely withdrew from her elite social circles. She could not handle the whispers, the sideways glances, and the pitying looks from her former sorority sisters. She locked herself in the cramped 2-bedroom apartment they had rented in Decatur, refusing to attend any community events. Her entire identity had been wrapped up in being a wealthy society matriarch, and without my money to fund that illusion, she had nothing left. Chantel was forced to face the most brutal reality check of all. With Preston gone and her parents bankrupt, she had to get a retail job at a luxury boutique in a local mall to pay off the massive credit card debt Preston had secretly accumulated in her name before he fled to California. She spent her days folding sweaters and serving the exact same wealthy women she used to look down on. They were living the precise, struggling reality they had mocked me for. They had spent their entire lives treating me like a miserable failure, and now they were suffocating in their own ruin. The end of December brought a crisp, bright energy to the city. I decided to host a lavish New Year Eve dinner at my penthouse to celebrate the new chapter of my life. I did not invite 50 random people to impress strangers. I invited 12. Tyson, Auntie Denise, my lead financial analysts, and a few close, authentic friends who had stood by me when I was building my business from nothing. The penthouse smelled of roasted garlic, fresh rosemary, and expensive imported champagne. A private chef I had hired for the evening was plating perfectly seared Wagyu steaks and butter-poached lobster tails in my open-concept kitchen. There were no arguments. There was no underlying tension. There was no one demanding I shrink myself to fit their aesthetic or constantly comparing my achievements to a golden child. The atmosphere was filled with genuine laughter, deep respect, and unbothered joy. As midnight quickly approached, we all gathered in the main living room. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline as we waited for the city fireworks to begin. Auntie Denise stood up from the velvet sofa, tapping her crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon to get everyone's attention. She wore a sparkling gold dress and a smile that lit up the entire room. "Hold on now, everybody, gather round." Auntie Denise called out, her voice warm and joyful. "I need to make a toast before the ball drops." She raised her glass, looking directly at me, her eyes shining with absolute pride. "To my brilliant, beautiful niece, Zuri. This year you showed us all what it means to stand tall in your truth. You showed us that blood does not automatically make someone family. Loyalty, respect, and genuine love make a family. You cut away the toxic dead weight and you built a kingdom. To Zuri, the absolute boss of this family." Everyone raised their glasses, cheering loudly. Tyson pulled me close, pressing a warm, proud kiss to the side of my head. I looked around the room, taking in the smiling faces, the warmth, and the absolute peace of the environment. My heart felt incredibly full and completely unburdened. I stepped out onto the private terrace, letting the cool, crisp night air wash over me. The city below was alive with anticipation. Millions of lights glittered in the dark, and the distant sound of celebration drifted up from the busy streets. I rested my hands on the glass railing, looking out at the empire I had secured for myself. For 32 years, I had allowed myself to be the emotional and financial dumping ground for people who fundamentally resented my existence. I had bought into the toxic societal narrative that family is an unconditional obligation, even when that family is actively destroying your mental health and draining your bank accounts. I had mistakenly believed that if I just worked harder, gave more, and stayed quiet, they would eventually see my value and treat me with basic human decency. But standing on that terrace, looking down at the world I had conquered, I finally understood the truth. You cannot buy respect from people who are fiercely committed to your subjugation. You cannot love someone into treating you right. Sometimes the most profound act of self-care is a brutal, permanent severance. Cutting off toxic bloodlines is not a sin. It is a survival strategy. It is the ultimate protection of your peace and your purse. My parents and my sister thought they could use my resources to build a fake kingdom of lies while locking me out of the castle. They thought they could humiliate me, discard me, and still demand my absolute compliance. They thought I would always be the quiet, obedient scapegoat. They said I was not welcome at Christmas. A massive firework exploded in the night sky directly above the city, bursting into a spectacular shower of brilliant gold sparks. The booming sound echoed through the air like a triumphant drumbeat, marking the definitive end of the year and the permanent end of my old life. So I made sure they were not welcome in my life. I smiled, taking a slow, deep sip of my champagne, feeling the crisp bubbles dance on my tongue. And honestly, it was the best gift I ever gave myself. The greatest lesson I learned is that blood does not automatically make someone family. Loyalty, respect, and genuine love are what truly bind people together. For years, I allowed myself to be a dumping ground for people who resented my success but demanded my resources. I thought shrinking myself would earn their love, but it only fueled their entitlement. True security comes from within, and financial independence gives you the ultimate power to walk away from toxic environments. Cutting off a toxic bloodline is not a sin. It is a vital survival strategy that protects your peace and your future. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your own peace? Let me know your story in the comments below, and please subscribe for more empowering journeys.